Hello, Edward Wills here, Tech Lead from Boom Beasts, and in this video I'd like to talk through everything I've been doing with the new menu. So to begin with, just a bit of backstory. Last year I spent quite some time doing a multiplayer menu system for a game I was making called Code Gunners, and it taught me a lot about Unreal's focus system and how much they don't really support controllers very well. So to begin with, I had made a nice little background piece in 3D Max, which is just basically a very simple shape with double turbo smooth, and then I rendered that out with the orthographic perspective to make some panels that look like that. So then if I jump into the Unreal Engine, a bit of setup before I show you the widget itself. So in the game mode, this is our menu game mode, which launches in the menu map, the first map to load in the game. Some old bits of code that I'm no longer using. It's gotten a little bit simpler, so the game starts. To begin with, we create the player controllers if they don't already exist. This is quite a nice little block of code I made that you can just sort of execute any time and it will never cause any complications. I use it in the gameplay game mode as well, just so that we can test the game from within a level instead of having to go through the menu every time. So really simple bit of code. It just says for each player controller, if it has for each number 0 to 3, if it has a valid controller, then do nothing. If it doesn't have a valid controller, create one. So even if you have like 3 controllers for some reason, you can throw this block of code back out there again, and it will just create the ones that are missing. Then we set our camera, which currently exists in the world, so we just find it and set it for all players. I have this as a function because every time a player dies it tries to reset everybody's camera to like world 0, so you need to execute this every time a player is destroyed. And then we create the main menu widget, which is the join game widget. I was planning to just do a join game widget and keep the menu one separate, but after working on it for so long, there was quite a bit of sort of disparity between how the two menus worked, and I figured it was better to incorporate the main menu into the one that I've just made. So it now creates the join game widget, adds it to the viewport, initializes it, and we're done with menu game mode. So the widget itself, I spent quite a lot of time building all of these, naming absolutely everything. You can see all of the variables on the side, or sorry, all of the elements on the side. Everything in bold is variable, as we see up here, and that means we can access it from within the blueprint. So what I do is I make everything in canvases, and then I can just show hide the canvases to show hide everything contained within them. It's a lot simpler, and I've gone through and made sure that all of the elements within each canvas are not a variable, just to make the graph panels a little simpler and less clustered. So we've got loads of stuff going on here. We have the title canvas, which you can currently see, the quit canvas, are you sure you want to quit, and then we've got the background on a canvas of their own, and then we have different canvases all for each player. We've got the join, choose a beast, choose a coat, choose a hat, and ready. And as you can see, we can have all different stages going on at the same time there for each player. Lots of stuff going on within these, so like the let's say if we take ready off and put coat on, you can see there we've got 3 vertical boxes which contain pretty much just text. It's just to keep the text centered within the box there, all to the full extent of the canvas, so when you resize and everything it still looks fine. So you got the title box, title text, body box, a blank image just to act as a spacer, another horizontal box to have the left text, image and right text, another spacer, the whatever panel we're on's name for the body, and then the number, and then another box as a footer with footer text in, and then images for buttons. And it's the images is the main reason I've done this as a canvas, because you can't put the images in, we can't have these as like nice symbols to just type out as a text. So like I say, yeah, just group it all together, and then we can just show hide the whole lot with one simple block of code. All of that going on for each player. We've got other things like countdown text, which only shows when it's counting down, and that's about it on the visual side of the things. Now I'll go through all of the code, which is why I'm making this video, because there's way too much of it to take screenshots and write up. So to begin with, our event graph in the widget. We have loads of key bindings going on because we're not using the focus system, we're not using buttons, we're just doing it all through controller input. So the initial sequence that we call back in our menu game mode once we've drawn the widget, first of all we need to update that text because it's no longer relevant. We were setting the game mode to game only because we were setting it to UI only in the previous menu, but now it just always stays in game mode, so we don't need that at all. Okay, so then it's just for each player, bind event, bind event, bind event, bind event, left, right, A and B. So despite me having absolutely loads of inputs, loads of different things to input for different whatevers, and in the player controller I'll go over in a bit showing you what's exactly happening there with the keybinds. We've broken it down to just a simple left, right, A and B for all players, and that takes in various inputs like the D-pad or analog stick or WASD or left and right, all into one nice easy chunk, so it's just calling one function for each action for each player. So that is the event graph completely for the widget. Functions I broke down into categories because it starts getting a little more busy, and breaking things into categories makes everything a lot more readable. You can see I get quite obsessive about naming everything when it takes me many hours. So we'll start from the start, I suppose, as we've got these functions here. Actually, I'll quickly cover the input and game mode. Don't need to go through that. So in the player controller we have our typical controls: move axis, jump, shoot, etc. What we were doing before was just, if there's a valid pawn reference, send the input to that pawn. Pretty simple stuff. I've ended up doing some strange stuff. So first of all we set a reference to the menu for all of the players when we created it, and then all of these player inputs, they first check if there's a valid reference to a menu, which basically means are we in the menu or not. And if we are in the menu, then we intercept those inputs, and depending on which player controller we are, we call the different event bindings or listeners or whatever back in the widget that I explained a short moment ago. So that's how we get all the inputs. There's some strange crossover like shoot going into jump because shoot goes into jump because I wanted the left click to also accept it's acting as an A button for the menu, but it doesn't for the gameplay itself. Probably could have done a better way of organising that, but it was just sort of, I just plugged it all in after I made it to make it work how it does without making too many changes and causing too many headaches. So back to the widget then. So we've got all of our inputs from the players, so then we go through our functions. So we've got left, right, A and B. As I said, I broke it down quite nicely. So we have, when anybody presses left, it figures out who pressed it. We've got a can menu switch flag because We didn't want the left button to just instantaneously cycle through all of the options forever. We wanted to put a slight delay on there, and that's what this is down here. Every time we press left or right, for that player controller we say I can't switch anything for 0.3 seconds, and then we resume control. So if we can press the button, we then say depending on stages. So we've made these nice little variables which has got some enumeration. Menu stage enumerator. So we have the different stages of the menu: exit screen, title, join, choose a beast, choose a coat, choose a hat, and ready. Those enumerators are then stored as variables: player 1 stage, player 2 stage, player 3 stage, player 4 stage. And then when you press left, depending on what stage you are at or who you are, it will do whatever it needs to do. So if you're pressing left or right on exit, title, join or ready, we don't need to do anything, so the execution ends there. If you're on beast, coat or hat, however, it will execute separate functions: change beast, change coat or change hat, and those are set up. Any player can use the same function. It just tells input, it gives an input as to which player controller is doing it. And also I've got this up down bool just to have your separate left or right controls. I probably could have called it left or right, but up or down seemed better for me at the time. After that we play a sound only off of the ones that have actually done anything. So if you press left or right on the exit screen, because it's not performing any actions, we don't need to play any sound. And then we break the menu control, which I just went over, for 0.3 seconds to prevent everything from looking awful. So that's the left. Scroll all the way back up here. We've got the right function, does absolutely the exact same, with the exception of the up-down flag being ticked to change which direction we're scrolling through the menu. A will of course advance the stage. We have some bit of a spaghetti junction going on here, but whatever. So first of all, who pressed A? Was it controller 0, 1, 2 or 3? If it was controller whoever, then get their stage, and depending on what stage we're on depends on what we do next. So if you're on the exit screen and you press A, you advance to you confirm that you're quitting the game. That's the only time that you're not advancing. Or you technically are advancing, but you're advancing out of the game. If you press A on the title screen, that will send you down here and advance you to the join menu screen, which we set for all players because we're changing the whole setup for everybody. We don't want to make sure everyone's back on the join screen and people aren't left on like halfway through options or things like that. And then we have functions to set what should be visible for each player. The next bunch are a bit simpler, so if you're on the join screen already and you press A, it advances you to choose a beast, advances you to choose a coat, and then advances you to choose a hat, and then advances you to be ready. If you are going from the title screen to the join screen, if you're going from the join screen to the beast screen, then we want to stop the countdown if it's running, because another player has joined the game. We don't want to start the game when they're only halfway through the options. And similarly, when you advance from hat to ready, we do a check to see if we can start the countdown, and that will in turn start the countdown if we should be doing that. Then we have the set player 1 visibility off of all of these to update the panel that player 1 is currently at. And then we play a sound at the end if anything happened that requires playing a sound for. I did have that here before, but there was a couple of points. Just if you are ready and press an A, we don't need to press a sound because nothing's happening. And I believe that covers the A button. B button, pretty much identical, as you can expect. Going from the exit screen, pressing B actually confirms that you don't want to quit, or cancels the quit. So we send everyone back to the title and we update all. If we initiate the exit from the title screen, that also requires an update all. Everybody needs to be on the exit stage. Other than that, we're pretty much the same. So we do our countdown checks when we advance from when we go back from beast to join, because you're basically leaving. They can do a check to see if there's like 2 players or 3 players still in the game that want to start playing. That'll start the countdown if it needs to be done. And again, stopping the countdown if somebody backs out of the ready stage. And stopping the countdown if somebody backs out of the join stage, because that will take everyone to the title again. That's all of the input. Then we have options: changing the beast, changing the coat, changing the hat. So it says who's pressed the option, have they pressed it up or down. We cast it to the controller to get the player character. Oh yeah, so in the player controller I've got some variables which are again those enums. Actually, sorry, it's more enums. Let's go and have a quick look at those. Oh yeah, player character enum, pig, cow, chicken, sheep. Player coat enum, coat ABCD. Player hat enum, which will obviously update when we get more hats in. I've made some sort of prototype hats for the time being. None, top hat, orange or UFO. And so those are all stored in the player controller, and we call them in here. So we see what player character is currently set to for the player controller, and depending on what that is, depends on what we do next. So if we are the pig and we are pressing, we're changing the beast, we're changing it off of this branch, whether it's changing up or down. So if we're changing it up from pig, it's going to cow. If we're changing it down from pig, it's going to sheep, etc. Change hat works the exact same. We find out which hat they are, we change it up or down. The coat works a little bit differently. It's got slightly more complex stuff going on. No, it hasn't. It has, but not quite here. Player coat, yeah, it just simply cycles through A, B, C or D, and we determine which coat that is through some more code in a bit. I'll show you. Countdown, all the countdown stuff I'll come back to. So let's have a look at set invisibility. Set invisibility for each player. So whenever the stage changes, we call this to update the screen on what's showing. So we've changed, say, player 1's, or let's say player 3's visibility to beast. We now want to be on the beast stage, so it says take all of the things and hide them. It's not picky, it just hides everything and redraws what it needs, as opposed to trying to be picky and saying I'll hide this and not that. It's just easier to just hide everything and draw it all again. So we hide absolutely everything, and then in this case for the beast screen we want the join menu canvas, which is the background panels that you see, and then the beast canvas, which I showed you in the designer. Pretty simple. So that's that, and like I say, when we go to the sort of title, we call this for all players, so all players will go through. It sets everybody's stage to title, and then everybody will say hide everything and show only the title canvas. That's the visibility. Then we have, I'll go through the countdown I suppose. So we do the countdown check whenever any player gets ready, or other situations where we might want to. First of all, we stop the countdown just to be safe. Then we say is that needed? Yes. We have a temporary variable called temporary player busy. So that just tells us if somebody's currently choosing a beast, basically, or if somebody's on the exit or title screen. They shouldn't be when we do this check, but it's there as a failsafe. So we set that to be not flagged, and we set the temporary number of players ready to 0. We shouldn't really need to do this because they are temporary variables, so they should come in as 0 every time as they default to, but I like to set them just to be doubly sure. Then we make an array of every player's stages, and then for each one of those, so it will say player 1 stage switch, player 2 stage switch, we go through them all in order. For each player we have a look to see what stage they're at. If they are on the exit, title, beast, coat or hat stage, we say someone's busy. And that's pretty much, when it comes to the end, going to say let's not start the countdown, because that's going to flag up as false. But if we are on the join screen, we don't need to do anything because they are basically inactive and other people can start the game. If they are on the ready stage, then we want to add them to the number of players that are ready. So we just simply increment the number of players ready by 1 and set it. Once we've gone through that with all of the players, we do a check here to see if we can actually start the countdown, and in order for us to start the countdown we must have more than 1 player ready, so we can start at least a 2-player game, and we need to make sure nobody else is busy, i.e. everybody that isn't ready is on the join screen. If those are both true, we can start the countdown. When we start the countdown, that's nice and simple. We just make the countdown canvas visible to begin with, and we set a 3-second timer to call a function called countdown complete, and we set the timer handle as a variable there, countdown timer handle. So then, scroll all the way back up here, assuming that nothing stopped the countdown, actually we'll go stop countdown. If we need to stop the countdown at any point, like we do whenever we need to do a new check, or if we've got other menu presses to say stop countdown as I showed you, then it's quite simple. We hide the countdown canvas and we clear and invalidate the timer. That'll stop it from continuing to count down through other bits of code running. Then, if the countdown is able to complete, if it wasn't stopped, we have some arrays here for players, beasts, coats and hats, which are local variables again. Despite them being empty, I clear them out to begin with, just because that's what I'm like. And then for each, we do the player stage array again, and for each one of those, we say if they are ready, then add that player's info to these arrays that we cleared out at the start. So we've got arrays for the players, the beasts, the coats and the hats. So let's say player 1 was ready. Player 1 stage for each loop. The element is ready, that's true. So it will say for the array index, which will be player 0. We know that player 1 stage is going to be player controller 0, player 2 stage player controller 1, etc. So we don't need to worry about this number ever being wrong. That's always going to match up to the player controller it is. So we get that player controller, we cast it to the player controller that we use, and for that player controller we take the options that we've been setting in the menu, such as character, coat and hat, as well as the controller ID itself, and we set these to the variables. So let's say player 1 wasn't actually playing, because it's totally possible with this system to have a game of just player 3 and 4. We'll say player 3 stage was ready. That was array index 2. So it will say for player controller ID 2, add that to the first option of the player's array, and this will generate, say if it was just players 3 and 4, the array will consist of just 2 items, which will be 2 values, which will be 2 and 3 for players controllers 2 and 3. And for each of those controllers we do the same for adding the character to the beasts array, adding the coat to the coats array, and adding the hat to the hats array. So if it was, again, like I've been saying, players 3 and 4, it will be the arrays will consist of ID 2 first line of this array will be ID2's character, ID2's coat, ID2's hat, and so on. This will become more obvious as to why I did that shortly. We then have in our game instance a struct we made called match settings, which stores these same array elements. I've set them up with defaults just so that if we did load the game from a level map itself, it will still work. It will still say, okay, we've got 4 players and they've been set up like this, just to make testing things easier, because it takes about 6 seconds to load the level on the build, and in the editor it takes about 2 minutes. Okay, so we set those arrays as this struct in the game instance, because the game instance is persistent and that will carry the information over from the menu level to the game itself. We did have an option string before to say the number of players, but I figured that setting this struct in the persistent game instance would be much quicker and easier than building a gigantic option string and parsing the whole thing back out again. Once we've done that, we start match, which creates a loading widget that I've gone through earlier, and simply opens the level. There's only one right now, so that's pretty straightforward. So that's all of the countdown covered and everything leading into the game. The only other thing to cover then in the widget code would be all of these bindings. So for each player, for beast, coat and hat, we go through all of these. Get player 1 beast image. This is the bindings on here, so it's like on the player 1 beast canvas, there's the beast image, which is an image just like this one here. Although it's not set to a variable, it's got a binding, so we can still set what that is on the fly without having it as a variable, so it's not listed down here, because that's busy enough as it is. For each one of these then, we've got to have separate bindings, unfortunately, for players 1, 2, 3 and 4, for everything on those menus. So these are all identical for 1, 2, 3 and 4, other than the controller ID we've put at the start here. It just does a simple read the player controllers, whatever information we need, in this case the player character, and do a switch on that enum. So if it's a pig, we set it to the pig picture. If it's a cow, we set it to the cow picture, and so on and so forth. For the beast name, much simpler, because we take the player character enum and we just convert it to an enum, convert the enum to text, or to string to text. That one's very straightforward. And then the number, pretty simple again, we just take the character and we return values 1 of 4 to 4 of 4. Same applies for player 2, obviously. The hats should be identical also, just different images. Obviously we're calling player hat and not player character, and it's the hat images as opposed to the character images. With the coat, things get a little more hectic, because we've got one enumerator for the coat, which cycles through A, B, C or D, and that value is the same no matter what animal you have chosen. So we have to kind of do 4 lots of it, where we do the same thing we were doing a moment ago, but instead of just doing a switch on player coat, we first do a switch on player character and then do a switch on coat for each one of those characters. So we go up to the pig, switch on player coat, and depending on what player coat they have picked, it shows pink pig texture, pig black texture, pig spotted texture, pig white texture, and those same values then translate to be the cow's brown spotted, black spotted textures, or the chicken or the sheep, various coats there. The same applies then for the names, where we have separate coat names for each pig's coat, each cow's coat, each chicken coat, each sheep coat. Numbers, however, 1 of 4. Simple. Stays the same. And I believe that is all of the blueprints for the widget. So that's that. And then we've covered the game instance, which is storing those settings for everybody. And then when the level actually loads, we go into our last beast standing game mode. Most of this was written up before. So what it's doing when we load into the game, we first parse options, which was originally parsing the option string I had. Instead now we simply have the 4 arrays replicated again. We take them out of the struct we stored in the game instance and set them in our local blueprint. We also set the number of players based on the length of the players array, but I don't think we actually need that variable anymore. That was for old code, so it's deprecated, I say. That's the parsing options. Then we create players again, like I said. That's just so that we can launch the game from the map and it'll still work. Then we initialize the spawn points, which I've completely redone. Before I just had 4 spawn points and we got all actors of class and then said if there is more than 2 players playing, keep spawning. It wasn't very good, especially if you had a 2-player game where you both start on the left screen and the whole right half of the screen was empty. So I've gone in and we get the player's length and do a switch on int. If there's 0 or 1 players, which there shouldn't be, then we just pretend that there's 4 and we default to 4, just to cover if that number for some absurd reason gets skewed into something it shouldn't be. And then, depending on how many players we have, depends on what the array of spawn transforms will be. So I have made an array of transforms, which is defaults to no element, but we set it here. If there's 2 players, then we spawn. Then we set 2 transform locations, so it's x500 and x3500, because the game world is 4,000 units wide, and it's 6,750 is the height that we want to spawn everyone at. So we've got one spawning at 500 and one spawning at 3,500. That's 2 players quite far apart. If there's 3 players, we spawn them at 500, 2,000 in the middle, and 3,500. And if there's 4 players, then it's just 5, 1, 5, 2, 5, and 3, 5. 4, 3, or 2 transforms. From there, we go and spawn and set values in spawn point for each player. So we have the array of players that we have. For each one of these, we spawn a spawn point at the array index of the spawn transforms. So if there's only 2 players, then this array will only be 2 elements long. So for player, the first position 0 in this array will spawn a spawn point at position 0 in this array. Same for 4 players or so on. Once we've spawned the actor, we tell the spawn point what the player's controller ID is, which is the info, not the array index, but the array element, as the controller 0, or again, like I say, if you've got just players 3 or 4 playing, array index 0 might have an element of 2. So we set the player controller ID. We then get for each array index the beasts, coats and hats array. So again, if it was just players 3 and 4 and the player controller ID was 2, then the first element of the beasts array would be the beast we stored for the player controller 2 also. We set the beast, coat and hat in the spawn point so it knows what to build when it spawns the actual player, and once we've spawned and set the information in all of the spawn points, we finally spawn all the players, which is we do a get all of actors of class spawn point for each one of those, initialize. Once we've done that, we return, and that's our big lengthy spawning blueprint function even. Then we spawn and set the camera. Quite simple. And then we initialize the beautiful timer that Alex and Kaylin were working on over the week. That's our like death checking for however many players are playing. We do still use that variable. Cool. And then the other bit of code that I added in was Alex has been working on the end of game stats, so we're now drawing that widget and adding it to the viewport. I just made sure that we can have a game loop by simply, after we've displayed that for 5 seconds, return back to the menu, create the loading widget just to disguise that game is freezing, and open the menu level again. That is our full game loop. So I've just launched the game to show you then, as the play-in editor isn't working for me today. So we have the main menu, press A or enter to begin. Press A to join. We can choose our players. If we choose, say, the chicken, then we have various chicken coats to choose from. If we choose the sheep coats, pig coats, and so on and so forth. So I think I'll be a brown spotted cow with a top hat, and player 2 we can be a pink pig with a UFO hat. You can see the timer there. If I press B just now, the timer stopped. I don't know if you saw it in the bottom of the screen. Resets back to 3 when we press it again, and then it loads up. Takes about 4 seconds, 4 to 6 seconds. And there we are in the game. One brown spotted pig cow, as we only have one actor in the game right now, with the top hat, and the pig is there in his pink glory of the UFO. When we explode another player, we get our work in progress end of game stats, and after 5 seconds we should return to the menu. Fantastic. Thanks very much for watching.